Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this second session of the Didomi Unity Masterclass, which is a summer series of 4 webinars on content management in gaming and with Unity that we're running throughout the summer. Last week, Yannick and Antoine discussed why content is important in gaming and what regulations apply to the industry. Today, we will dive into more practical matters and discuss how to set up the Didomi CMP in a Unity project to start collecting consent and getting compliance with data privacy regulations. My name is Jawad Stouli, and I'll be your host today. I'm the CTO at Didomi, where I oversee product and engineering, and I'm joined by Charlotte Perrin, who's our data protection officer and who leads our customer success team.
Hi, everyone. So as Jawad said, I'm Charlotte, and I'm DPO at Didomi, so I'm privacy expert, and we are glad to speak to you today.
Thank you, Charlotte. Charlotte and I have been working with our clients and publishers for years now on implementing CMPs on websites and mobile apps. Today and next Monday, we'll share the key steps to successfully implement a CMP into a Unity game. Feel free to ask questions as we go, and we'll answer them either throughout the presentation or at the end. As I mentioned, we're running a masterclass as a series of 4 presentations during July to cover all the aspects of setting up the Didomi Content Management Platform in a Unity app. We're covering all relevant topics, why you should adopt a CMP, the regulations and risks, how to set up a CMP, and how to optimize the consent rate, as well as a bunch of other topics. The sessions will be uploaded to our YouTube account, so you can share them or view them again if you're not available for all masterclass sessions. First, I wanted to say a quick word about the Didomi Content Management Platform. We're a software as a service platform to help get in compliance with data privacy regulations like GDPR or CCPA by collecting, storing, and sharing consent with third parties. We're available everywhere your users and clients are, on all platforms like web, mobile native, Unity, and we're currently working on connected TV. We also support a wide variety of forms of consent and languages to make sure that all your users can use your content management platform. It's also very easy to set up through the Didomi console, where most of the work can be done without technical help. And we put a lot of focus and emphasis on helping developers implement our solutions. We support smart SDKs that allow an easy customization extension of all the standard UI and UX that we provide with standard compliance with GDPR and the TCA framework. We'll also provide an open API and documentation for developers to be able to deploy our solutions very easily and with a lot of flexibility. We're live across hundreds of clients around the world with major publishers and brands in Europe and in the US, like Newsweek or Orange in France, for instance. And Didomi in numbers is also the leading solution in Europe in terms of content management. We support more than 90,000 websites and mobile apps where our SDKs are deployed, and we run on billions of devices every quarter, collecting billions of consents every month. So to jump right in, Charlotte is going to tell us more about how to create a Unity consent banner with the Didomi console.
Thanks, Jawad, for this introduction. So yes, I'm going to show you how to create your Unity consent banner directly in the Didomi interface. So when you are a Didomi customer, you have access to the Didomi interface, who allows you to create your consent notice directly in the platform. So you can create as many banners as you need. You can also create your banner for web or IMP format or environment. And if you need help, you can also add your teammate directly from our interface. So the first step of your banner creation is selecting your environment. So first, you need to choose your deployment environment. So first, you need to name your consent notice and then select an environment. As you can see, we have several environments in which you can deploy your consent notice. You can deploy your notice on your website, on IMP, but here for your Unity banner, you will need to select the mobile app environment. You will also have to add your app ID. You can implement the banner on all your app if you have several applications, or you can choose to deploy your banner in a specific application. If you have several applications, you can. It's up to you. The next step is to define your banner look. So it's the second step of the banner creation. You need to choose first the format of your cookie consent banner. You can choose a bottom format, a sticky banner for your application, or you can also choose a pop-in format, blocking format. It's has an impact on your content rate. And at Didomi, we have many articles about how optimize your content rate. So we can share it if you want. So second steps of the customization is to choose your banner colors. So you can choose the color of your buttons, the color of the link, etc. You can also add your logo. And you can customize your text. So we have default texts that are GDPR and IAB compliant. So you can choose to keep our text. They are translated in, I think, 27 languages. And you can also choose to customize your text if you want to have specific text for your application. You can also choose your own text and add your translation directly from our interface. Here you have an example of Didomi cookie consent banner. So as you can see, you can totally customize banner to match it with your brand. Your banner will be GDPR and IAB compliant because we are also expert in privacy and we can help you with the legal requirement. Important thing, you can optimize your UE to have a higher content rate. First step of your banner creation will be to select your partners. So in our interface, we have a database of 200 vendors. We have IAB vendors that are already linked to purposes, and we also have non-IAB vendors, of course, already linked to purposes. So you can select your vendors and you will have nothing to do more. But you can also, if you want, create your own purposes for your cookie consent banner in a few clicks from our interface. We also have an option to create required purposes for your essential trackers. So the user will not be able to refuse this purpose. So we have several options of customization. So you can just keep our default settings, but you can also customize your purposes and your partners. Next step is to parameter your banner behavior. So in this step, we have several options. For example, we allow you to not display the banner for non-EU visitors. So if you are a non-EU company, you can totally choose to not display the banners to your non-EU visitors. You can also parameter a delay to not reopen or recollect the consent each time you add a new vendors. It's important for your content rate, so we allow you to parameter your delay to not display the banner each time you are adding a new partner or a new purposes. Next step is the IAB. Our IAB, you can select our IAB integrations. Didomi is an IAB CMP. That is to say that we are compliant with the IAB framework. So it's allow you to pass the user consent status to all your IAB vendors, and you will have nothing to do except select your vendors in the console. And Didomi will push the user consent status to all your IAB partners. So you have nothing to do. Google is joining the TCF framework. So if you are using Google, for example, for your advertising, you can just select your Google partner in the Didomi console, and Didomi will push the consent to Google. Didomi has been validated by the IAB framework and we are compliant with the version 2 of the framework. Last step is managing your third-party SDK. So for the non-IAB partner, you will have to condition the loading of your partner SDK to the user content. So we have a very detailed and technical documentation, explaining you what you need to do to condition the loading of your non-IAB partner to the user content. We have documentation for your vendors who have a custom API, so which the vendor which you can communicate the content, and we have also a documentation for the vendors who do not have a custom API to send them the user consent status. So that's it for my part. I let Jawad present you the technical part in how to deploy the Didomi CMP on your apps.
Thank you, Charlotte. And as Charlotte mentioned, configuring the Didomi consent notice in your console is just the first step. The deployment of a complete CMP is made of 3 key steps. The first one is creating the Didomi consent notice in the console. The second one is adding the Didomi Unity SDK to your Unity project. And the third one is conditioning the loading of non-IAB vendors. I wanted to go through the second step in a little bit more details to give you a brief overview of what that looks like from a practical perspective. The Didomi Unity SDK is provided as a standard Unity plugin that can be downloaded and added to your Unity project. All the steps are present in our public documentation in the Unity section of the Mobile SDK's documentation guide. And adding your Unity SDK to your project is really 3 simple steps. The first one is downloading the Unity package from our release page on GitHub. The second step is adding this package into your project through the import function of the Unity editor. Once that is done, the Didomi SDK can be called to initialize itself through a simple function that is exposed by the package. So you can provide the API key as well as a few other configuration options that will help us locate the correct notice to load from the Didomi console. Once that is done, the last step is configuring the UI to ask the Didomi SDK to display the consent banner whenever you want it. By default, the Didomi SDK will display the banner every time consent needs to be collected, and this will be done automatically as long as this call is done in your app startup behavior. So those are the 3 simple steps to add the SDK to your Unity package. The usual process is to create the consent notice in the Didomi console, then work with your developers by sending them this documentation to make sure that they implement those steps. And then the Didomi consent notice will automatically start appearing in your mobile apps after those steps are taken. And I wanted to show you what it looks like from a practical perspective. Once the Unity package has been added to your app, we will automatically start showing our consent notice. Here is an example of what we call a banner, which is the simplest form of consent notice. It is a sticky banner that stays at the bottom of the app until the user has made a choice. And it contains a simple text that can be configured through the Didomi console. That means that you will be able to update those texts and all the behavior of the SDK without having to modify your app. You will, once the SDK is added to the app, you will be able to use the Didomi console to modify and update the behavior of the SDK. So this notice basically allows the user to get more information on the consent that they are going to be giving, or to automatically give consent by clicking on agree and close here. And as Charlotte mentioned, we'll look at a few examples, but we have a wide variety of formats that we support, and we allow completely customized UI. So while this is an example of our standard banner, you can implement all the views that you want and make sure that you match the exact UI of your existing game. So if the user chooses to get more information on the CMP that is deployed and specifically on the consent that they're going to be giving, they get taken to this view here that we call the preferences, and that provides a list of purposes that your user are giving consent to. You can see here what we call the standard list of IAB TCF purposes, which is all the purposes related to digital advertising. So getting access to the user device to store and retrieve advertising identifiers, for instance, is something that you need to collect consent for and that we will automatically collect consent for. It also includes a few other purposes like selecting ads or personalizing content, which are also important purposes under the TCF and under GDPR. So on this screen, the user can make granular choices if they want to, which is also a legal obligation where they need to be given the option to make specific choices by purpose. Even if it's not directly on the first screen, the user has this option to make specific choices and to get specific information. So you see the 5 purposes, and every purpose has more information on what it entails for the user. From that screen, users can also agree to all or disagree to all, depending on their choices and how they feel about those purposes. Another key requirement of both GDPR and the Transparency and Consent Framework from the IAB is having a list of all the vendors and partners that your app and that your company are working with. So you can see here what we call the list of vendors or the list of partners, which is the list of all partners that are enabled in this app and that we're collecting consent for. A lot of those are the IAB TCF vendors, and the user is also allowed to make granular choices on those vendors. You can see, for instance, this vendor here that is offering the choice of consent on a few different purposes that they are working with. And so this view here is a legal requirement, as the user needs to have all the information around what they are giving consent for. So that includes all the purposes, but also all the third parties, all the vendors that your app is working with for advertising, analytics, or any other purpose. And users should also be given the option to make granular choices for every one of those items. And so that's the standard view that is proposed there to be in compliance with both GDPR and the TCF. A lot of what Didomi does, obviously, is keeping those views up to date with the regulations, with potential changing regulation in every country of Europe. So GDPR obviously is a European level regulation, but it has country-specific recommendations or specifications that are created by every data protection authority of every country. And so Didomi works in making sure that all those obligations are correctly respected in those views, and that when you decide to join frameworks like the TCF, we'll also make sure that our UIs are compliant with the TCF. So those standard UIs are basically composed of what we call the notice, which is this banner here, the list of purposes, and then the list of vendors, which are the 3 standard views you will see in a lot of CMPs out there, and that help you stay in compliance with both GDPR and industry-specific frameworks like the TCF, which is important for monetization of all the inventory that you might have in terms of advertising. So the second step, once the SDK is configured in your application, the standard Didomi notice will start popping up. Here you have an example of a pop-up format that is slightly different from the banner we looked at previously. And that gives you an example of format that takes more space and gives a little bit more information to the user as well. Once the SDK is added to the app and once you start collecting consent through the Didomi SDK and through those views here, the question that remains from an integration and deployment perspective is, how do vendors integrated in your app get access to that consent information? That's where frameworks like the TCF are very important. The TCF is a standardized framework across the advertising industry for collecting and sharing user consent. That means that once you work with a CMP like Didomi, we will automatically push the consent information of the user to your advertising vendors that will be able to automatically adapt their advertising practices to the user choices, ensuring that you stay in compliance at all times. That includes Google, who recently joined the TCF as well, and who is deploying their TCF integration as we speak. So once you deploy a CMP like Didomi that is TCF compliant, you get a lot of your vendors automatically taken care of for you. Some of your vendors that are not IAB vendors, like Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager, might require a little bit more work on your side to make sure that they correctly collect the user consent status from Didomi. That is something we will go through in more details next week. But generally, you might have to process a few of those vendors in a slightly more manual way than you would do with the TCF vendors, for instance. So to recap a little bit, the 3 key steps to deploy the Didomi CMP in your Unity app are basically creating a consent notice in the Didomi console, adding the Unity SDK to your Unity project, and then configuring a few of your non-IAB vendors in your app through your developer team, basically. One element that is particularly important at Didomi is making sure that you can fully customize your consent notice. We understand that this first screen here that collects consent from the user is particularly important to the user experience. It very often is the first screen, the first view that users will be exposed to in your apps, or one of the first ones. And it's important that it naturally blends into your existing application, your existing game, and that the user does not see it as a completely external piece of information. So our job is to make sure that you can fully customize this screen. We allow you to design and implement your own notice. We help you ensure that your notices are fully compliant with both the regulations and frameworks you might be a part of. But we do allow you to design those views in the same way as you would design your regular game views, and then implement them without having to use our standard views if you want to. What we see very often is clients customizing this very initial layer here that all your users or most of your users will see, while they rely on our standard views for more advanced choices. So what I showed before as the purposes list or the list of vendors, those usually stay as standard views, but we let our clients replace the notice, which is the initial layer, with their own custom view. And what we've seen time and again is that this has a direct impact, obviously, on your user experience, and then on your consent rate, and then as a consequence of that, on your ability to monetize your inventory. So making sure that your consent notice fully blends into your user experience is particularly important, and Didomi supports all those use cases out of the box. In terms of resources to get started, we offer basically two main resources. The first one is the Didomi console and console.didomi.io. Feel free to reach out to us to get access, and that will allow you to start creating your consent notices, customize them, and work with your developers on getting that deployed. And then for developers specifically, our developers documentation is public on developers.didomi.io, and will allow them to fully understand the Didomi platform and how to integrate it into your own applications. And we're basically done on our presentation for today. I hope we've helped you understand better how to deploy the Didomi platform and how to configure it to use a very customized UI that matches your own app UI and your own game UI. Now we have a little bit of time for some questions, so I'll take a quick look to see if we have any question here to discuss. All right, first question here is, when should we ask for consent? I think that's actually a pretty good question, a pretty interesting one. What we see pretty often is that the user consent rate is directly linked to the timing of the consent collection. That means that if you open your consent collection view immediately, you might have a lower consent rate than if you wait a little bit for the user to be engaged with the app. So the more the user is engaged with the application and with your game, the more likely they are to give consent. And what we see pretty often is apps that would delay content collection to a little bit later in the workflow, which is perfectly fine from a legal perspective. The main balance to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, until you collect consent, you're not allowed to do targeted advertising and some of your internal operations like analytics, for instance. And so you might be getting lower CPMs, lower revenue from users that have not given consent. That is very usually what we see from our publisher's view. And so the longer you wait to collect consent, the more time you have where your inventory and your operations might be running without consent. So this might drive to a lower CPM until the consent is actually collected. So it's always a balance between how many ads are you displaying before collecting your consent, what's the engagement path of your users, and how often they come back. For users that are very engaged and that come back in your app very often, it is usually acceptable to wait a little bit longer to collect consent. Whereas games and apps that are used and that have a lower retention factor from their users might be tempted to collect consent earlier in the process to make sure that more of their inventory is exposed to that consent there. Charlotte, anything you would add on here?
Jawad. It's very, very clear.
All right. And so another question that I'm seeing here is how important is a custom UI for the notice versus a standard UI from a CMP? So that's something we discussed a lot today. And from our perspective, the standard UI of a CMP usually is good enough to get started. We have seen a lot of clients deploy a first version of their standard UIs that would do just fine in terms of both constant rate and revenue. But what we do see pretty often is that having a highly customized UI that completely blends into your game experience and completely reuses your game assets and elements is a much better experience for the user and is a much complete form for the notice itself. So we usually recommend to work on completely customized notices in a second, as a second step to the Didomi integration, where most of the work can be done without even having a custom UI. But we do recommend, especially for gaming, to spend time on building a very customized experience that the user will be more comfortable with. This will have a direct impact on your console rate and eventually on monetization and revenue. And a lot of what we look at, obviously, in deploying CMPs is that question of console rate that directly drives your CPMs, that directly drives your revenue eventually. So any small investment like this in spending time building custom UIs and things like that, at the end of the day, has a high likelihood of giving you a higher payoff than the investment itself by having a direct impact on your console rate as well. And I'm seeing another question here that, Charlotte, maybe you would be a little bit in a better position to answer than myself, which is how long does it take to implement the Didomi CMP into a Unity app?
Yeah, thank you, Jawad. On average, it takes about a week to implement the banner on your mobile app. You will need, I think, 1 day to create the banner in the interface. It's the quickest and easiest step. But you will maybe have to ask your legal team to review your text, for example, and also you will have to select your partner. So yeah, 1 day, I think it's a good estimation. Then for the customization and the condition of your third-party SDK to the user content, it will take 3 or 4 days. And I think it's the more technical part, which needs technical deployments. And then you will need 1 day for testing your implementation before going in production. So 1 week, I think it's a good estimation of the work.
Okay, that makes sense. And we're obviously happy to help in testing applications. That's something we do pretty often, where we can spend time testing your applications before you deploy them to your users and making sure that everything is in place, both in terms of content collection and vendors integration. We're almost at time here, but I think we have time for one last question. So can we force users to consent or leave the app? That's a question that we see pretty often, which is at the end of the day, are free to force users to give consent or not use your services, not use your game. That's a question that is legally a little bit complicated. There has been, the tendency seems to be that it is not acceptable to prevent a user from accessing the app if they're not giving consent. I would say that's the legal direction we're taking. That being said, it is not necessarily enforceable today in some European countries. So there might be some leeway there, at least in the coming months. In the longer term, another direction that could be taken is to offer the user choice, which seems to be more acceptable from a legal perspective. That choice could basically be asking the user to pay or to give consent, for instance. Any form of alternative like this seems to be more acceptable from a legal perspective than simply denying access to the user. Keep in mind that those legal questions are changing fast. We're still early in the GDPR adoption cycle at the end of the day, and so we see regular recommendations coming from data protection authorities in European countries that give us more guidance on what is acceptable and what is not. So while it seems acceptable today to offer genuine choices to the user in terms of giving consent versus other monetary alternatives, that might change in the future, and that's where adopting a CMP like Didomi helps in making sure that when and if those legal requirements change, Didomi will basically implement the new requirements and allow you to very easily switch to other modes of content collection based on the new regulations. So we're going to stop here for today. I wanted to thank you all for your attention. The content that we went through today will be available on YouTube later on. We'll also publishing all the webinars from this masterclass series on YouTube. So you're free to review it as much as you want. As usual, feel free to reach out directly to us if you have any question, if you want to get started with the Didomi platform on Unity. We're happy to help, and we'll see you again next week. And thank you very much, Charlotte, for your time today and for being with us.
Thank you all. And as Jawad said, do not hesitate to contact us if you have any questions about Unity SDK and other questions about the CMP.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thanks. Bye.